HSM, how's it going? As always, excited to be with you tonight, particularly as we start a brand new series in the month of December that we are calling Better Together. So as we get rolling in on that, I even just want to take a step back and say I really hope that your Thanksgiving was awesome. I hope that you ate all of the food and took all of the naps and watched all of the football. Thanksgiving is one of my favorites because right under thankfulness, it feels like one of those holidays where we get to celebrate feasting and napping. And those are just some particular gifts of mine. So having a lot of fun with Thanksgiving. But with this series, you're going to notice, even right from the get-go right now, that it looks a little bit different, and that's intentional. Let me tell you why. So in the month of December, we're going to be in a series again that we're calling Better Together. And really what our goal is, what we're seeking to accomplish, what we're driving towards is this. We want to see and be what God calls us to be as the church. We want to see and be what God calls us to be in the church. So we want a really clear vision of what God calls us to be in the church, but then we want to take actionable steps to be more and more like that. And that'll be the next 3 weeks as we head into Christmas. So it seemed only appropriate as we talk about living in community and being in the church that we get other people involved and do this in a community-oriented way. So that's exactly what we're going to do. And without further ado, I'm excited to introduce you to both Caroline and to Joe, who are with us right now on Zoom. Both Caroline and Joe are on staff here at LCBC and have been around LCBC and student ministry specifically for a long time, but then have also been involved with other churches prior to that too. So excited to have them both on. What I want to start off with before we get into the meat of our conversation right now is tell me, one, if you have any Thanksgiving family traditions that you do annually, like year after year. And then the other thing is being with it right after Thanksgiving. We're not even like a week removed right now. Still have leftovers in the fridge. What is your favorite Thanksgiving side dish as well? So favorite Thanksgiving side dish, and then any family traditions that you guys do during Thanksgiving.
I'll go first. So I have to say, I'm actually not a big lover of Thanksgiving food. I know that's probably a really unpopular opinion. I know. But if I had to pick, I would probably say sweet potatoes with the marshmallows on top. I think that's pretty good because it's kind of like a dessert within a side dish. So I would say that. And then for family traditions, we change things up a lot every year, but I would say one thing that we pretty consistently do is after we eat our big meal, usually all my siblings and I, and then my dad, clean up the whole entire kitchen together. We don't let my mom help since she does all the cooking.
Did your mom start that tradition?
What?
Did your mom start that tradition?
You know what? Honestly, kind of.
That's so good.
Yeah, so it's great. But it's fun because we blare music during it and dance around and just make it really fun. So it's honestly become one of my favorite parts of Thanksgiving because we just make it a blast. So
that's awesome. Super cool. How about you, Joe?
Sounds so fun. So my family, we don't have a ton of traditions as far as holidays go. But one thing that we do every year is we do a Secret Santa because I have a big family. I have lots of older siblings and they have kiddos and husbands and wives. And so it's just a big family get together. So to buy everyone gifts would be absolute insanity. And I would go broke every year. So we narrowed down to one person. We do a Secret Santa. And so for Thanksgiving, we always that's when we do the big drawing of the name ceremony. So that's our Thanksgiving tradition, happens every year. And then as far as Thanksgiving side dishes, I am also with Caroline that I'm not huge on Thanksgiving food. I love ham way more than I would enjoy turkey, but I do love mashed potatoes. And those are good. You can eat mashed potatoes year round. I feel a lot of other Thanksgiving foods you only eat on Thanksgiving, which is weird in and of itself. But mashed potatoes you can eat all year round. So I'm going with mashed potatoes.
Okay, so this seems like an important question. Are you a mashed potato purist where you're I don't want anything in them? Or are you loading it with butter and garlic too?
Dude, I'll mix everything in there. So if there's corn, I'll throw corn on my mashed potatoes. I'll mix the other food in there with the mashed potatoes, man.
That's awesome. So let's jump into the meat of our conversation. What I want to do, as always, is just root what we're talking about in Scripture. So we're going to start there in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. It reads like this. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. I'll just read it twice because it's quick. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. So just like borderline, like bottom level truth that we want to lay down as we get started is that community is essential. It's absolutely essential. And oftentimes in conversations that happen around the church, a sentiment that I hear communicated, or a thought that I hear communicated, is like, hey, I'm all about Jesus and I'm all about God and following God, but I've been to church before and I'm not about that. So I'll follow Jesus and I'll strengthen that relationship, but the horizontal relationships when it comes to people that are within the church, I'm not about. I'd rather not. I'm going to step away from that. And it was interesting for me, even just this past year, it was my goal to read all the way through the Bible. And it was interesting because one of the major themes that I saw, particularly as I read the New Testament, is that God cares so much about how his people treat his people. He cares so much about the relationships that happen within the church. And at least as far as we can tell, it's not something where we can just say, hey, I follow God and I'm about Jesus, but I'm not about the church. They go hand in hand, and it's God's calling for us. It's what he moves us towards, is community and relationships together. So jumping into that a little bit, it can be really difficult to do that, even though God calls us to it. There can be all kinds of different situations and circumstances that are like, hey, I know that this is important. I know that this is what God calls us to do, but for whatever reason, this is really difficult right now. And I want to talk about a couple of those things. For you guys, over the past several years, what have been things that have gotten in the way of you engaging with the church and investing in relationships within the church? What have been obstacles or things that have caused you to neglect our meeting together, as we say in Hebrews?
Okay, I can go first.
Oh, you got it.
Okay, so I would say probably two things. So the first one, I would say whether that be like back when I was in high school and going on Wednesday nights to youth group, or now having an adult small group that I meet with, people from our church. Oftentimes my husband Nick and I can make the excuse of busyness. And so like right now, if there's weeks where we feel like we have something every single night and we're like, oh, we just didn't go to small group tonight, like we'd have a way more low-key week, or we'd have one night this week to like get more stuff done around the house or just relax a little bit, and we can totally find ourselves just having that excuse. So busyness, and even back when I was in high school, just like having sports and different kinds of things, or lots of homework, feeling like, oh, like I'm too busy, I have too much to do, like I don't need to go. And then another one I would say is fear. And with that one, I would say like when it's something new for me, so whether it's like the first time going to a youth group, or it's a new group that I'm joining, or even for like our adult small group now, fear was definitely something that almost held me back at the beginning. Just that fear of knowing I'm gonna have to share, and I'm gonna have to open up and speak, and maybe even be a little vulnerable, and especially because it's a smaller group of people, just that intimidation and being afraid of that, whether that be being afraid of, I don't know, I don't want to say something and sound dumb or whatever it may be. Fear has definitely been one that can hold me back at times.
Yeah, and like that's so true. Like I love that point, because we really can't get a full experience of what God wants us to experience in the church unless we overcome that fear and actually like invest in those relationships and become vulnerable and actually like communicate what's going on with us. So yeah, that's awesome. Joe, how about you, man?
Yeah, so for me, I was definitely my own worst enemy, especially in college, when it came to procrastinating my workload. And a lot of my stuff would be due Sunday at midnight. And so like, you put it off during the week, and then Saturday, you realize how much you have to do Sunday. There would be like, when I was serving, there would be some last minute texts to my supervisor when I was volunteering at the church, like, hey, I need all day Sunday to do homework. I can't come in the morning. So that was definitely a thing that got in the way a lot. That was my own just poor preparation and procrastination. But like, you get so stressed, and then you're like, if I just don't go to church Sunday, I'll have like 3 or 4 extra hours. I can sleep in a little bit, get started earlier. And so it seems so tempting and appealing to use that as like catch up time, or to use that to like get ahead or whatever it might be.
Yeah, totally agree. And I feel like that's something that everyone struggles with to a point, because like it can be any area of your life that if you're not on top of it, it'll naturally then kind of billow over into that church segment, and it just becomes margin time. So yeah, absolutely. Want to take the turn a little bit and then say like, hey, so these are the problems that we work through. These are the things that get in the way. These are the mindsets that kind of inhibit us from being in church in the capacity that we want to be. What are things that you've thought through, or things that you've done, or maybe situations that you've experienced that have helped you work through that, and just like actually move past those problems, or at least battle them a little bit?
Yeah, I would say for me, so even for Nick and I right now, with going to our small group and having that godly community a consistent part of our lives, we talk about not being led by our emotions. So while emotions aren't a bad thing and God gave us emotions, we just don't want those to be what lead us in our life. And so God calls us to be led by his truth and what he calls us to do, and by the Holy Spirit. And so just on those nights where we don't feel like going, we say, all right, you know what, we don't feel like it, but we're going to go anyway. And what's cool about that is every single time we don't feel like it and we end up going, we always come home saying we're so glad we went. Like, we know we needed that. And so, yeah, so just not being led by emotions is definitely one for us. And then with the fear one, I would say just having to remind myself that fear doesn't come from God, and that God did not give me a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind, like he says in 2 Timothy. And so for me, anytime those feelings of fear come up in my life, that's totally a red flag of like, okay, this isn't from God. So honestly, it's probably Satan trying to keep me from something that God really wants me to do. And I don't want to let Satan win in that area. And I want whatever God has for me in this. And so just reminding myself of that anytime I have fear about anything, but specifically when it comes to experiencing community, whether I know that night it's going to be a heavier topic and it's hard, it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult. I don't want to let that fear hold me back. And so just reminding myself of those truths of, you know what, this fear isn't from God. And so I'm not going to listen to it.
Yeah, and even like that first point that you made about just making it a discipline, like that's so fresh for me right now, because it's true in so many different areas of life. I used to like lift weights a lot in high school and college from being in sports, and I haven't at all since I stopped. I was like, I never want to look at a weight again. And I just recently started doing it. It's just like needing to stick to the discipline of it, because I get so sore afterwards and it's a pain to go to the gym and I don't always want to do it. But then on the other end of it, I know that it's better for me in the long run, and healthier for me long term. So like not letting those feelings take over the moment is so huge. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, mine was really easy. All I had to do was graduate, and then the problem stopped. Just kidding. Because if I never solved it, it would just become something else, right? Like there would be something else that I'd be procrastinating on that would be preventing me. So for me, I had to make it a priority that I wasn't going to sacrifice church time as catch-up time. And so like, if I knew I was going to need extra time to homework, maybe I just would stay home one night instead of hanging out with friends, or, you know, like I would sacrifice that time somewhere else, and just make it like a deal breaker of like, I can't take away from the church time, you know, like I need to be there every week. So that was a huge thing for me. And honestly, just trying really hard not to procrastinate. Like when you get the assignments, just do them, man. Don't put them off till you absolutely have to do them, but do them when you got time.
Yeah, it is crazy how like those other responsibilities can ultimately affect you spiritually. Like you'd never really think about it, but it totally happens. So another exercise that I do, it's probably like once a year along those lines, is I'll kind of ask myself the question of, if someone got a front row seat to my life and they got to see my actions, they got to even like hear my thoughts, see how I treated people, see how I spend my time, what would they say that I value? And then just like thinking through that, if the actions on this end don't equate to what I'm hoping that I value, to what I actually want to drive towards, then it's time to make a change. And that so often happens with church too. It's like, I do want to prioritize my relationship with Jesus. I do want to prioritize my relationships at church. If people saw how I live, would they assume that? Would they draw that conclusion? And then, yeah, just making moves from there. So want to turn it a little bit. So have already established that our relationships at church are super important, and that God does call us to that. I want to talk a little bit about and think through how that should look. So first thing that we want to put down is really back in Hebrews chapter 10. It was a real quick phrase, but I don't want to like run past it. It simply says, encourage one another. which is such an easy thing to just kind of like say, oh, well, yeah, duh. But think about that. Like for all of us, when you go to church or when you go to HSM, do you go with the particular mindset of thinking, how can I encourage other people? Because if we're not doing that, then that's a definite like place where we can grow. Like when you go, is it, hey, what can I say that's going to encourage someone in my small group? Or, hey, what's the attitude that I can pick tonight that'll just inspire and lift people up? Or, hey, is there a way that I can even like just make someone laugh to just like lighten their load a little bit and frankly just like bring a good vibe? That is something that we should do when it comes to our involvement in the church. So encouraging one another. But then the second thing, I want to bring in Galatians chapter 6, and this is verse 2. It's real short again, so I'll just read it twice through. Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. One more time. Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. So when we talk about how we interact at church, yes, we encourage one another, but then we also share each other's burdens. And there's a lot that we could say on that, but I think it's really well illustrated by this like book. So this is just a Bible. It's a study Bible. It's just like probably about a pound. It's no big deal. And I don't know if you could see this in the shop, but if I just like extended this out and had to carry this Bible out all day, chances are like I might be able to make it an hour or two, and it's not that heavy. But at some point, if I just like held it out in front of me for that long, like my muscles are just going to say no at some point, and I'm going to get too tired and I'm not going to be able to do it any longer. And the reason I bring that up is because that's a lot of how like our burdens work too, where people in your small group or people that you go to church with, some of us have these small burdens that we're carrying for long periods of time, and some of us in shorter like seasons of life will have these enormous burdens that just feel crushing. And that's one of God's intentions for the church, knowing that all of us as people are going to have to carry those burdens. And at some point we're going to get too tired, we're going to get crushed under it, we're not going to be able to handle it. That is part of what the church is supposed to do, is rally around each other in those moments and say, hey, I'm going to help you hold this up because we don't do life alone. So important when we're thinking about how we interact with the church, that we're encouraging each other, but then also that we're sharing each other's burdens. So want to kick it out to you guys for just a little bit and say, hey, is there a way that you've been able to either encourage other people at church or share each other's burdens over the past, I don't know, like couple of months or so? Or has there been a time that someone's been able to do that for you?
So what stands out to me right away, there's a time when I was in high school, when I was at HSM, and John Wilkinson was leading HSM at that time, and I was going through some stuff with my family, just some different struggles with my brother that was kind of spilling out everywhere else. So John knew about that, and he just, texted me and invited me out for some lunch. He came, picked me up. I was probably in like 9th or 10th grade, so couldn't drive there. But he came, got me, took me for some lunch. And honestly, I don't remember any specific insight he had or anything like that. But what I do remember was that he took time to listen to me. And that he, just was thoughtful and asked questions and stuff like that. And like, that meant so much to me, just him being available and taking that time. Like sometimes I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves that we have to have some kind of special insight for someone or else we're not going to be helpful to them. But honestly, a lot of times if they have a burden, if they have something weighing on them, they just need to be able to share that. So like providing space for someone to do that is huge.
Yeah, and that's so good. Even just to interject a little bit, like realizing that you don't need to have some kind of super special fix for everyone's problems. And usually you don't. You just want to be able to get close enough that they know that they don't have to do it alone. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say bouncing off of that too. So in our small group, which is, again, my husband Nick and I and some people from church, right now one of the couples, their family members, is going through a really hard time right now with some mental health stuff. And they just have asked us to just be prayer warriors for that person. And so it's just been really cool to see how that's brought them so much encouragement. And again, like you guys are saying, like it doesn't have to be some big thing. Like we don't have to say some insightful thing and have all the answers or whatever it may be. It's just the prayer. They just want that prayer and to feel like they're not alone in it. And it's just been really encouraging for them to know that we're taking that to God for that family member. And so I would say that. And then on the flip side of that, just a time that I felt like they were sharing my burdens with me. So I've been teaching in HSM for probably a little over a year now. But I used to be terrified of teaching in HSM. So like on stage on Wednesday nights, public speaking was like my biggest fear. Like it was so hard for me. And so I just remember asking my small group at that time to just be praying for me about that every week when I would be teaching. Just knowing that they were being prayer warriors for me during that time was so comforting, so encouraging, and definitely just brought such a calm to my heart. And so that was totally them just sharing that burden with me, which was really cool.
Yeah. And jumping in on that too, like realizing that like encouraging and sharing each other's burdens can be this really big thing, or it can be like just little things too. In my adult small group right now, there's a particular family that's going to be moving out of the country soon. And it has been over the past year, like all of our group's responsibility in a way of just helping however we can. So at times that means prayer. At times that was helping out with some logistical stuff with the move. At times it was helping out with paperwork stuff. At times it was helping out figuring out what they're going to do with their pets. All these like little things and big things that just culminate to like this huge, almost like a group project that we had of continuing to help share those burdens, all the way to like on the small side of it. Literally, it's probably 2 or 3 days ago, there was a couple that's in my group that called me. It's like 8:30 at night, and they were like, "Hey man, are you doing anything?" And I was like, "No, not really. Like what's up?" And they were actually moving too, but it was just like a local move, and they were thought they had everything out of their apartment, but they didn't. And there was this big thing they needed to get down like 3 flights of stairs. And they're like, "Hey man, can you run over real quick and just help us out with this?" And it's just like a really small thing. It took me 5 minutes to drive over. It took 5 minutes to get it down, and then I just went home. But sharing each other's burdens, encouraging each other, being there for each other can show itself in all kinds of different ways. So cool. So to wrap things up a little bit, and then I'll just have one more question for you guys. Overarching kind of themes for today. One, community is essential. God calls us to be in relationship with Him, but He also calls us to be in relationship with His people, which is His church. And then secondly, life in community calls us to care, and we talked about 2 specific ways. One, to encourage each other, but then the other one to share each other's burdens. And for everyone that's listening tonight, just want to give like 2 real like big action steps for whatever your community is. One is this, and this is gonna sound kind of blunt, but I think it's helpful. Stop thinking about yourself so much. So like that's like, oh, like that kind of hurts, but like really start thinking about other people more. Think about when you go to HSM, how can you encourage someone? Who is someone in your group that you know is carrying a burden that you can encourage in some way, or help in some way, or pray for in some way? As the church, we're constantly meant to be rallying around each other and supporting each other, and that's a step that we can all make. The second thing is to actually like let people in. It can be so easy to get caught up in the fear that Caroline was talking about, where it's like, well, what if people aren't navigating the same problems that I am? I don't want people to feel burdened by my burdens. Like, no, like that's actually what the church is meant to do. We're meant to help and support each other. So if you've been hesitant to actually share, to actually let people in, do it. Say what's on your heart, say what's on your mind, so that we can continue again to grow into what God has us to be as the church. So last question, and this is just kind of a broad one because we won't have you guys every week, is very simply this. Has there been anything that you've learned or thought through, or any situations that you've been in that have been particularly helpful for y'all in thinking about your involvement with the church? So again, super broad, just like one bigger thing for each of you.
Yeah, so I would say, really going off of what you just said, Caleb, that it's not about me. And specifically when it comes to that fear, because that can be a big one for me, is, God gives me the perspective that He gives me for a reason. And when I don't share that perspective with other people, I'm holding that back from them. It's honestly just me being selfish because I'm caught up in that fear and worried about what they're going to think or whatever it may be. And so that's totally been a big mind shift for me of just, it's not about me, and I want to use what God has given me. And so I want to use that to serve other people. And so that's probably the biggest one for me.
That's so good. Yeah. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, going along right off of that, for me, it was a huge perspective shift of church isn't about what I get out of it, and being in community isn't what I get out of it, but it's what I can contribute to it. And so that was a huge shift for me, because sometimes if you're only looking at maybe getting fun out of going to church, if there's a week where church wasn't fun, all of a sudden you don't have a reason to go anymore. Or if it's only about learning something cool or something specific like that, like the weeks where that doesn't happen, all of a sudden you lose the reason to go. But if it's all about what you contribute, what you bring to small group, or what you bring on the weekends if you serve, like then you have a reason to be there every time, because other people are missing out when you're not there, and other people are missing you when you're not there, because you're going into a room thinking about how you can make it better, not just what you can get out of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll close it down for today. Excited to be with y'all throughout this series, and excited to continue to grow into what God has us to be as His church. We will see you guys next week.